In the heart of the Pacific Northwest, amongst dense towering woodlands, an enigmatic legend has persisted. There have been countless sightings.
There have been sightings every 10, 15 years. You can look it up in history books practically.
Stories passed down through generations. And perplexing evidence that have fueled belief in a creature known as Bigfoot. The figure of Bigfoot has become a cultural icon, from grainy camcorder footage to blockbuster Hollywood movies.
You know, at the very least, there's no question that the phenomenon exists. People claim to see this creatures. It's part of the American psyche.
Is it a new species of animal?
Twice, I think that I saw some real tracks.
A relic of early human evolution? Or perhaps something more otherworldly? But to this day, the question still lingers. Could Bigfoot really exist? Or is it a hoax?
You can see patches of fur put together that are consistent with a man pulling off a hoax.
Although the legend of Bigfoot is mostly an American phenomenon, similar stories have prevailed globally for centuries. Each country and culture had their own names for similar figures that have popped up in folklore record. European cultures often have descriptions of a wild man covered in hair with only the face, feet, and hands remaining bare. Across the globe, Australians call it a yowie. The yowie has its origins in Aboriginal myth and resides in the deepest stretches of the outback. In the Asian Himalayan mountain range, the ape-like creatures are named yetis. Numerous anecdotal sightings have been reported, accompanied by photographs capturing elusive glimpses and purported footprints preserved in plaster casts.
Both of them heard a loud, piercing, shrieking animal call.
And this call was unrecognizable as any other animal?
Not known to any of us. It's interesting enough, the Sherpas, if you ask them what cry does a yeti have, they usually describe it as a scream, a shriek, or like some form of disturbed game bird.
Which is similar to the sound
Similar to the sound which my friends heard.
Native American tales describe tall, forest-dwelling, and hair-covered creatures. 1,000-year-old petroglyphs created by the Yokuts tribe supposedly depict them. Bigfoot's other name, Sasquatch, is actually thought to be an anglicized version of Saskats, which translates to hairy man in the Halkomelem language. The prominence of Bigfoot-like figures suggests that the phenomena could start to be thought of as an undiscovered species rather than a singular isolated oddity. In 1924, this centuries-old legend resurfaced. 5 men claimed to have had a violent encounter with gorilla men on Mount St. Helens, Washington. They reported the hairy figures pelted their cabin with boulders before fleeing, leaving behind large human-like footprints. The U.S. Forest Service would investigate the site of the incident, but found no compelling evidence to prove its legitimacy. It was deemed a fabrication. Yet this wouldn't be the end of similar stories gaining attention.
Every major continent in the world has a Bigfoot with a different name. In Australia, it's Yowie, it goes on forever. Each country has their own name for it. Each state in the United States, except for Hawaii and Rhode Island, has a Bigfoot. But the hoaxes come from every state in the Union, every country in the world, and I think it'll continue for as long as man's on Earth. It gives them something to do. I think I've said it before that man needs their monsters. You need something that's just out there, just out of your reach, that you can't quite touch, to keep you going, something interesting to do.
But how did this mysterious creature come to be known as Bigfoot? The tale traces back to 1958 in the Six Rivers National Forest, California. Jerry Crew, a bulldozer operator for a logging company, stumbled upon a curious find. Deep within the mud lay a series of large 16-inch footprints resembling those of a human. Crew's revelation sparked intrigue among his crewmates, who recounted similar encounters at other work sites in the area. Their stories caught the attention of local newspapers, which coined the name Bigfoot. Plaster casts were swiftly made of these colossal footprints, and the story rapidly gained momentum, spreading like wildfire across the United States. Numerous sightings, especially in the Pacific Northwest, began to form a collective image of Bigfoot. A towering, muscular, ape-like creature cloaked in thick fur. Witnesses often described elongated arms, and after nightfall, eerie accounts of red glowing eyes. The tally of reported Bigfoot sightings in the U.S. has since exceeded 10,000, providing a wealth of diverse information. Some claim to have caught whiffs of Bigfoot, likening the scent to a potent blend of skunk, decaying animals, and refuse. Others recount hearing unsettling sounds. Grunts, screams, and even what they perceive as a complex language. Cryptolinguist Scott Nelson has recorded and analyzed alleged Bigfoot noises. Nelson's scrutiny of recordings like the Sierra Sounds led him to conclude, it is definitely a language, it is definitely not human in origin, and it could not have been faked. Moreover, some individuals report physiological reactions to these vocalizations, such as dizziness and anxiety, leading to speculation that Bigfoot may emit infrasound. Infrasound is a low-level frequency that is not consciously perceived by humans. It is thought to have profound physical and psychological effects. Could this enigmatic low-frequency sound hold the key to unraveling the mystery of Bigfoot? Bigfoot mania exploded in 1967 with the release of the Patterson-Gimlin film.
You know, this thing's been going on since the 1700s, actually before that. The legend goes way back. And things happened over the years that people said, you know, that's that creature again. It kept popping up. And then we come into the 60s. On October 20th, 1967, 1:15 in the afternoon, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin were riding up Bluff Creek, California. And behind the logjam, they disturbed a creature that stood up. And that is the Bluff Creek film now, the Patterson-Gimlin film. This creature walks away. It's 952 frames of 16 millimeter film. And this creature goes halfway through, turns and looks at us, and walks away into the forest. It doesn't run, it walks very abruptly. It just wants to get away. And this film has changed the whole Bigfoot thing.
It was the biggest evidence yet of Bigfoot's existence. Claiming to depict a female Bigfoot walking in the Six Rivers National Forest. The filmmakers were friends Roger Patterson and Robert Gimlin. They had ventured into the woods where Jerry Crew had previously found the footprints. Their mission? To uncover the truth behind the legend of Bigfoot. The story goes that as they delved into the wilderness, they found an overturned tree. Suddenly, they spotted a figure lurking behind, crouching on the opposite bank. They fumbled for the camera to capture what they believed to be the elusive creature itself. Bigfoot. The film shot shows what the pair claim was a hairy, ape-like figure, matching previous descriptions of the creature. They attempted to follow the figure but lost it in the heavy undergrowth of the forest. They returned to their campsite before making plaster casts of both left and right footprints left behind. Those who believe in the film's authenticity include Jeff Meldrum, who was a professor of anatomy at Idaho State University.
My area of expertise is primate functional morphology, or the functional aspects of the shape of anatomical structures in primates, particularly how they move. I've looked at the Patterson film very carefully from a very different vantage point. I've looked at its anatomy and tried to assess aspects of its anatomy that might indicate one way or the other. And there are numerous aspects that, as I said, beg to be answered, to be addressed in more detail. These footprints are very impressive to me, not because of their uniformity, but because of the variation in foot flexion and toe position that one can see from one track to the next. Were it simply a static prosthetic foot, you'd expect a much more consistent trackway with one footprint resembling its successive footprint very closely. But instead we get dynamics of the footprint that indicate flexibility. The transmission of weight is evident in the footprint from one spot to the next. There's pressure ridges, there's tension cracks, and so forth. Clearly, there's no way to determine with 100% confidence that a footprint is authentic, but there are means to assess the probabilities. And these features have to do with the dynamic interaction of the foot with the substrate as opposed to an artificial contrivance or a false foot being stamped into the ground. We have a combination of evidence of extreme weight causing a deep impression in the soil, but also dynamics of the foot that show a smooth transition from heel to midfoot and occasionally to toes. But these features in the form of pressure ridges, tension cracks, these are indicative of a dynamic living foot.
One thing about footprints too is the fact that they can be easily faked. You can make one. You can sit down and hand form one in the sand and pour some plaster in it, and there you have a foot, no matter what size you want to make it. And we've had them up to 24 inches long, which is ridiculous. One thing about having the tracks, that is one of our hard evidences. You can take that, measure the track, the width and length of it, and you can get approximately within an inch or so the height of the animal that made that track. What happens here is we have a professor over at the Oregon Primate Center that helps us on that. And by having a footprint, you can take that and measure out from the toe to the ball, from the ball to the heel, and that will give you the approximate height. This is a formula that's been worked out over the years and will give you the height of a man, for instance. One thing about the tracks, if you have 3 or 4 in a row, that you can look at yourself, and if they have any slight variances to them, it gives you a pretty good idea that at least they're not a stamped-in foot, that someone made a pattern and just stamped it in. You look for those differences. That's the first thing you look for when you go to the ground. I've been taken to places where there's tracks many times over the years, and I have no way of knowing how they made them, but sometimes I get the sense that I'm being hoaxed. Twice, I think that I saw some real tracks. Whether they've been made by a man's foot, I didn't know, but a fairly large foot at that.
Even though the Patterson-Gimlin footage is less than a minute, the film endures as the most iconic representation of a Bigfoot. It has convinced people all around the world that Bigfoot does exist. It is said to be one of the most analyzed pieces of film in American history, second only to the footage of JFK being assassinated.
In 1967, everybody looked at it. Even the University of British Columbia studied it. Patterson himself and a few others took the film around. Rene Dahinden took it to Russia. They studied it in Russia. And everyone come up with the same conclusions at the time, that they thought it was real. And then the professor started coming out of the woodwork. This thing cannot be real. We have no hard evidence. This is only a film. So there's been controversy from day one. There's been pro and con on this film.
Others, such as Cal Korff, a journalist, believe the video is a hoax.
I started researching the Patterson film when I was very young. In it, at first, I tried to ascertain the height of the individual, and in particular, I was fascinated by the stride between the footprints. They either were made within the parameters of a human being or they weren't. My impression of the Patterson film then, especially now, is that it is a hoax. It is a human being in a fursuit. When you look at the Patterson film, it's obvious that the people that faked this went to a fair amount of effort. This was not a typical gorilla costume one could buy at Halloween, for example. But it is a hoax. It is not real, and they put a lot of effort into it. Give them credit for that. But to say that it's real, no. That's making a statement that is not derivable from real science or the facts. The fact that we have never found the actual suit doesn't create a mystery. They could have burned the suit, they could have destroyed it. If I had faked this, I wouldn't have left any evidence around. A good hoaxer will do that. They will destroy all evidence. So the fact that they've never found the suit, or that it didn't come from Macy's or didn't come from some mail order place, doesn't prove that there is no suit.
Rancher and businessman Clyde Reinke claims he has inside knowledge that proves the Patterson film is a hoax. In the early 70s, Reinke worked for a film distribution company called American National Enterprises. He says that Patterson also worked for the company.
I wasn't with the company when the Bigfoot film was shot, but it was shot by an employee, Mr. Patterson of A&E. He was on the payroll as a permanent employee, salaried, as a photographer.
Reinke claims that Patterson was told to fake the Bigfoot sighting by A&E. According to Reinke, A&E's strategy was to use the Bigfoot film as a loss leader, positioning it between their other, less sensational films. The aim was to attract more people to the cinema, thus increasing attendance for A&E's other films.
It is in these vast, unexplored wilderness areas of North America that a 9-foot-tall, human-like creature is reported to live. This is the home of the Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, as the Indians call him.
They took the Patterson film and they put it together with Cougar Country, distributed nationwide. The Bigfoot film, being along with Cougar Country, just increased the attendance in all the theaters nationwide a tremendous amount.
He even identifies the man in the suit as a man called Jerry Romney, who completely denies the allegations.
Well, I guess she said she ran into this guy down in Hollywood that worked for A&E, and he's the one that told her this. And so she was just calling to investigate it, you know. I guess maybe just because I'm pretty big and close to A&E, and I'd made this other movie with them, you know, and I knew all the executives very well. He just decided that was a good story, that Russ financed this and put me in that suit. But that's not true.
Well, the only way that I know definitely it was Jerry Romney in the suit is because Jerry Romney told me so. He used to laugh about it all the time, thought it was a really funny situation. I don't know whether Jerry will ever tell the truth to anybody, but he's the kind of a person that just might.
When I look at the Patterson film, I have to be honest and admit that it matches the general anatomy of Jerry Romney. For example, when I saw Jerry Romney walking, it reminded me of the Patterson film. I couldn't help but notice a similarity. Also, when I analyzed years ago on a computer the height of the creature, I knew it was under 7 feet. Jerry Romney is around 6.5 feet tall. Now, I have to admit that the similarities are circumstantial, but they're fairly persuasive. And when I look at the similarities between Jerry Romney's anatomy, the way he walked, the way he carried himself, versus the Patterson film, and then when I consider how he was defensive about the whole subject of Bigfoot, I'm very suspicious. Once again, Jerry Romney has to address the specific allegations of Clyde Renke. Both men can't be right. One of them is not telling the truth, or one of them has recollections that are in error. Another similarity between Jerry Romney and the Patterson film is that when you look at the footage of Jerry Romney turning back, he looks very similar to the creature when he looked back towards the camera. So when Jerry Romney looked back towards the camera, he gave the same kind of look that the Bigfoot creature does, looking back towards the camera as well. That's either an amazing coincidence or it's the same guy.
However, Bigfoot believers like Jeff Meldrum maintain that the figure couldn't simply be Romney in a suit.
I was able to briefly view a piece of video which depicted an individual who, it has been suggested, was the man in the costume in the Patterson film. And this video segment showed this individual walking with a normal gait along a road for the intent of comparing, at least superficially, his gait with that of the Patterson. This individual is of a fairly large stature and could conceivably have been such an individual in the costume. But there are many aspects, or several aspects, that immediately are apparent. First of all, at least in his normal casual walking gait, he employs a very typical human stiff-legged gait. Nothing like the bent-kneed, compliant, powerful gait evidenced by the subject of the Patterson film. There are also other aspects of his physique which require more detailed measurement and analysis, but nevertheless my initial impressions are that his limb proportions are not extraordinary, nor are his measurements in the terms of girth. I think he would fall very shy of shoulder and hip girth, as evidenced in the Patterson film subject. This individual also happens to have a very high and prominent forehead. And as I have mentioned, the aspect of contriving a facial mask or a costume that takes into account and accommodates the steep forehead of a human in the sloping forehead of a Bigfoot costume, per se, is a problem.
The Patterson-Gimlin tape, shot in 1967, remains the most popular and controversial footage of an alleged Bigfoot. Although many claim it as a hoax, it is yet to be officially debunked. It remains proof for believers around the world of Bigfoot's existence. In the decades following the Patterson-Gimlin tape, several other videos have surfaced claiming to provide evidence of the elusive Bigfoot. A notable example is the Snowwalker tape, which gained significant attention and speculation amongst cryptozoologists and Bigfoot believers around the world.
Well, the Snowwalker video was quite intriguing because it presented a rather clear, unobstructed daylight view of the subject. It purports to depict a creature moving across a snowfield, a rock-strewn snowfield, somewhere in the Himalayas, near Tibet or Nepal. Unfortunately, we have absolutely no other or confirmed contextual information regarding the identity of the witnesses or the precise location, and therefore no way to confirm those aspects of the film.
We have this snow walker video, as it's called, and it's supposedly come out of Himalayan mountains. Now, when it came out, you'll see here, this creature was sitting along a trail in the snow. Now, he's slowly getting up here, and from this distance, when most of us agree on this creature looks pretty good. He's got bulk. His arms look quite long here, but you've got to take in consideration he's in deep snow also, so his arms will be closer to the snow than it would be to the ground. But as he gets up, he stumbles a bit, which you would probably do in the snow, so we have no fault with that. And then he starts to step out.
I must say that my initial impressions were very interested or intrigued in that what I saw, the motions appeared to be rather natural, and the configuration of the subject was somewhat more ape-like than I had expected, in the sense of the way in which the head was on the shoulders and the relative lengths of the arms and so forth. But it quickly adopted a more upright posture as it began to walk up this snowfield.
Okay, here we have it sitting. We don't know why a big creature out in the middle of the snow would be sitting down in this cold snow, and then as the camera comes on it, it starts to get up. And it has a little bit of problem getting up. The problem with sizing on this one is, it's been said that this walkway, this trackway going up the hillside was 16 inches wide. We don't know that. There's no way of knowing that. From this distance especially, it's hard to tell how big this creature is. We do not know the size of this tree. We don't know the size of this rock. So we have no comparison, no track to compare this creature to. He does look rather bulky, though. He does look rather large. Yeah, that looks quite a bit of length through there. Now, another thing to remember is his feet are buried in deep snow. So the arm is closer to the snow than it would be to the ground. It does make it look a little longer there. And this thing will continue on up the hillside and then disappears up over the top. The only problem we have with this film is here it comes again from nowhere. We have no name of the people that shot this film. We don't know where it came from. Now, on the background of this film, we've looked into it quite a bit, and we have people that have spent a lot of years over there in the Himalayas. And especially one of them says, this is not the peaks that we're looking at. It's the wrong kind of formation. The older a mountain gets, the way it wears down, you can tell basically most of your mountain peaks. These are a different type of mountain. It has also been said by people that those type of trees do not grow over there.
Well, there was, it clearly, I mean, it was obvious to me immediately that this was not in the principal Himalayan range. The topography just was not consistent with that, and many people have commented to that effect as well. The prospect remained, however, that it might be an area referred to as the Trans-Himalaya, further to the east, where the elevation is lower and there are more temperate forests. Others were quite adamant that the topography, that the vegetation was inconsistent with the setting, as one might expect to encounter in the Himalayas or the Trans-Himalayas. There was one expert commentator who does commercial trips to the Himalayan region, even went so far as to suggest that it could have been filmed in Montana. The thing that was puzzling was that there were short segments of the video that showed very panoramic shots of large mountain ranges, which from my experience did not seem consistent with any site I was familiar with in the United States or any mountain range, mountain physiognomy that I was familiar with. In hindsight, those could easily have been edited into the segment, obviously, from stock footage of other areas.
We have a lot of things in this film that are kind of strange. We have a friend who spends many, many years over there. And the vegetation is wrong. The trees are not right for over there. The type of peaks that are there are not right. Age does a lot to mountains, and they wear down differently, and they have their own definite shape. The Rockies you can tell, the Himalayas you can tell. And our friend says, this definitely is not the Himalayas. So therefore, that puts it out of whack. Now for me, what settled it was, about 9 months or 10 months before this film came out, myself and others were contacted by phone by a sort of French-speaking couple, and I now have been told it's Flemish, asking where would be a good place to go film a Bigfoot. What would be your best chances of filming a Bigfoot? I always tell people that, well, the Rockies or Canada, and through Vancouver, British Columbia, on down to California. Just beautiful areas in there, with many sightings. Well, lo and behold, a few months later, here comes a Flemish-speaking couple, send in a film, again, without their name, doesn't say exactly where it was taken, when it was taken, how it was taken, and here we have another creature on film. My opinion is, it's the same couple that contacted me months before that, and this film is a hoax. Right, we've run into these problems so many times, we look for these things and they stick out like a sore thumb. Here we don't have the cameraman's name, we don't know where he shot it, we don't know when he shot it, they don't have anything to give us, no addresses, we can't contact these people, we're told they're traveling somewhere around the world and they can't get a hold of them. We don't believe that, it's just like everything else, there is no basis, no fact to back up this film either. People that come out with these films, now we were told that this particular TV show was sent this film anonymously in the mail and told they could use it to run. So here they show us this on a national TV show saying that they don't know who shot it, they don't know where it came from, only that it was shot in the Himalayas somewhere, sometime.
The scenario was painted that they frequently previewed or reviewed footage that came into the brokerage house looking for interesting pieces of footage, and that this caught their attention and they thought this might be something worth pursuing, and therefore subsequently contacted the International Society of Cryptozoology, of which I'm a member, and sought expert opinion through the society. The fact that the promoters of the film were not forthcoming with details regarding the identity or the precise location, although they professed to be making efforts to produce that information for us, it was never forthcoming, left the film in a state of limbo. It was essentially of no scientific value to us other than an intriguing prospect of the potential of something interesting, something worth pursuing.
Another piece of footage that has sparked much debate is a film known as the Ohio Tape.
Now, we have a tape from Ohio that was sent to a man in Michigan who's been researching for years. It shows a creature in the snow, and what we don't like about this is it looks too much like a man. You'll notice in this tape, and I'll show it to you now, that it starts from left to right. And it's hiding in the trees right here, right in the V of this tree. And now it will start off and go to the right. This looks like a man's gait and a man's walk. But you'll notice at different points he'll stop and he hides behind the trees. We find this rather curious why he would play peekaboo with us all the time.
Like many other videos of Bigfoot, the footage is frustratingly low definition.
My initial impressions of the Ohio video clip from Mr. Kappa are obviously very limited. It was a very cursory viewing of it. This piece of footage also suffers from the same shortcomings that we experienced with the Yeti video, in that we have absolutely no contextual information. We can't go to the scene. We can't establish the scale. We can't look for physical evidence of any kind. And obviously, the time elapse would preclude that. Beyond that, as a student of primate anatomy, I must say that it was better than some hoaxes that I have seen, but there were aspects of the gait in particular, and the demeanor, the carriage of the body, the position, the center of gravity, what appeared to be a superficial attempt to imitate the gait that was characteristic and quite distinct of the subject in the Patterson film. but a very poor representation of that gait. So my impressions would not be very optimistic and would be very reserved at this point.
When I watch this Ohio footage, all I can see is what I've seen before, and that's a man trying to act like a creature. When you watch this thing walk, it's got the gait of a man, and he just kind of elongates its step. Now, we can't say that that's not how a Bigfoot walks, because I've never seen one. But in my mind, that is a man in a costume. I can tell by the way he's walking out.
The center of gravity appears to be poised back very far in an unnatural position. Some of the behavior, the dodging behind trees and so forth, just seems very unnatural and very contrived. So I'd have to say, in a very preliminary manner, that I'm not very impressed with this video. It's better than some that I have seen, but it leaves much to be desired in the way of being compelling.
When you watch a film like this, you just think back on all the other ones you've seen because they're all so similar. We've had various tapes come in. We've seen different ones on TV that we didn't get ourselves. But they're also very similar. I mean, they're either way too thin or way too far away. They're never in focus. You never get a good video of this creature.
My expertise being in the realm of anatomy and not in videography, I really can't speak to the technical aspects of the clarity of the film or other aspects of its nature, its technical nature. But purely on the basis of my impressions from the subject itself, it's difficult to comment in too great of detail given the brevity of my exposure to it and without being able to study it, to blow it up, to look at limb proportions, body girth, angular velocities and so forth, the limb segments. Those are the aspects that I would look at. If it's congruent with a human, then one can simply not eliminate the possibility that it's a human in a costume. If it's incongruent, it raises the possibility that something unhuman, that some other biological entity is responsible for it. But even then, one would require much more in the way of corroborative data in order to say anything conclusive.
When you're estimating height on the video, it's very hard to do just by looking at scenery alone, unless you go to that point and see a tree and say, okay, this branch was this close to his head. But by using a formula with the foot, you can tell just about the right size of the creature. As in the Patterson film, it was 14.5-inch foot on it. And it has now been estimated through mathematics that creature was 7 foot 3.3 inches tall. There was no way of telling in this Ohio case about the tracks because all they sent to this man was the film. There was no tracks shown, so there was no measurements of the footprint. Just estimating through the trees like this, and you can judge by the size of the trees, everyone thinks it's maybe a 6 foot 3, maybe 6 foot 4 tall man.
Anonymous videotapes that arrive in the mail, while they may be stunning or intriguing, are essentially worthless.
Because of the various pieces of footage that even Bigfoot believers deem a hoax, many discount even more intriguing pieces of evidence as also part of a hoax.
What I find interesting is that there does appear to be a shift in attitude, an attitude both amongst the amateur community of Bigfoot investigators and amongst the scientific community. Amongst the amateurs, I think that there are more people who are just sincerely interested in getting to the bottom of this issue. Many of these people claim to have had firsthand eyewitness experiences, and sometimes the motivation is simply to vindicate their own story. But they're much more willing to cooperate. They're not hoarding information. They're not vying for media attention.
There can be several reasons why people hoax Bigfoot sightings.
There's been times when people have set other people up to look like the fool. Well, we always figure, well, we believe in this big hairy creature in the woods, we're kind of fools anyway, we can't prove it exists. But there are times when you have an enemy that doesn't like your style of investigating that will set you up. A lot of times people will send you tapes or pictures in the hopes that they can hoax you. And maybe you'll make it public. You'll go out and say, hey, look at this is a Bigfoot film. And then it gets proven to be a hoax, and well, instead of the person who hoaxed it, his enemy gets to be the fool of the whole thing.
But what methods do Bigfoot believers use to identify possible hoaxes?
Well, you've got a set of rules you follow when you're investigating to find out what's a hoax and what's not. The areas that they take you to, you will look at the tracks that they have in the sand or in the dirt or in the rocks, and you'll see two perfect tracks. And they may be the right distance apart, maybe 4.5 feet apart that look really good. But then there's no more tracks. And they don't think about that. Well, why didn't this creature continue on? Why don't we see more disturbances in the ground? And so right away you know that, hey, this is probably a hoax.
For anyone assessing the potential of a given piece of video, I guess a number of things would have to be borne in mind. One, if it's authentic, if the discoverer or the videographer is sincere in his motivations for bringing this to the attention of the scientific community, then they should be completely forthcoming with all details about the context, about the timing, the setting, and so forth. Anonymous videotapes that arrive in the mail, while they may be stunning or intriguing, are essentially worthless. They're just no value whatsoever to us. Beyond that, it's really difficult. The details that I'm looking for are extremely subtle, would not be evident to the average person. And that's sort of the litmus test or one criterion by which I can gauge some of these things, is there are aspects of anatomical detail that might be evident to myself that would never even occur to a potential hoaxer. And so it's just important that experts in this field, in the field of primate anatomy, primate locomotion, comparative anatomy, have the opportunity to look at these things very carefully, unobstructed, unrestricted, in order to assess the validity.
You know, we get these tapes and we look at them, and possibly some of the other people have already seen them and said, hey, what we have here is a real tape of a Bigfoot. Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, there's a lot of eagerness in this field to have a new film to look at, and there's mistakes made. All these people are not experts. They're authorities like myself. You look at these things all these years, but if you haven't seen a real creature, how can you study it and be an expert? You've got to use it a little bit of grain of salt here. You've got to look at it yourself and say, is this real? Is this guy right? Is this guy wrong? Because we all make mistakes. I mean, none of us are perfect. But I think a lot of times, a lot of the authorities want to believe just so there's some new material out there. They don't necessarily think it's real, but they overlook this or that just to make it look better. You certainly can't trust what you see all the time. I mean, I have watched shows over the years on Bigfoot, knowing quite well that something's faked on them, that I've studied that piece myself maybe a year prior and found out it was phony. There is one plaster track that was made by an anthropologist back in Indiana and a friend of mine. And it was sent to another anthropologist who swore up and down that it was real. It's not real, but it's been portrayed such in a book and on TV. And I know for a fact it was made by these two people. Sometimes when a guy comes up with a tape, and you'll notice on different TV shows, radio interviews even, that have sound tapes, if they're close enough, people want to see them, a man can make some money off of his tapes, even though they're hoaxes. Your average TV person, of course, doesn't have any way of knowing if it's a hoax or not. He presents the evidence, lets you make up your own mind. So the person who does come in with that tape, sometimes they make a little bit of money, but it does fade away. Once it's been seen 2 or 3 times, people lose interest in that certain tape and it's gone. You know, when hoaxes come in, and they come in quite often, we all look at them. Eventually, all of us get a copy of it, or we get to go see a copy of it. And as far as trying to put it across to the public, I don't know everything. Renee DeHinden doesn't. Everyone doesn't know everything. But you put it all together, and you've got to use your own judgment when you look at something. If you see something that looks really hokey, like some of these films that we've seen, don't be afraid to admit it or question it. Don't just take an expert's advice. And how can you be an expert on something you've never seen? I've never seen a Bigfoot. I'm an authority. I've studied this thing for 30-some years. I've studied the Patterson film. I've studied the other films. I've studied photos. But I'm not an expert.
Both Bigfoot believers and skeptics agree that there is an abundance of hoaxes. For example, the 1958 Jerry Cruz story was revealed to be a hoax in 2002. The family of Cruz's co-worker, Ray Wallace, discovered a collection of carved wooden feet used to make the large footprints. However, non-believers also attribute other Bigfoot sightings to various explanations. A common theory is that Bigfoot sightings are, in fact, another known animal. Black bears are popularly thought to confuse hikers due to their upright walking habits. Areas where Bigfoot has been spotted, like the Pacific Northwest, usually have increased populations of black bears. The scientific view is that allegations of Bigfoot's existence are a hoax or a delusion of the witness. There is a lack of verifiable evidence, such as skeletal remains or clear video proof. Yet people all around the world still believe that in some way or another, Bigfoot exists. While numerous videos have been exposed as hoaxes, and scientific study often dismisses sightings, one piece of evidence stands out for its unassailable nature: the Patterson-Gimlin tape.
The Patterson film is what keeps me involved, for the fact that it's got the realism to it. It has not been proven wrong, and they've tried. Everyone's tried to prove it wrong. The rest of these things we look at, we can either find things that we're pretty well convinced that it's a hoax, or we just have to let them go because they're just phony.
I've spent many, many years examining adaptations in primates to terrestrial locomotion and particularly human bipedalism. And as I look at the subject of this film, there are aspects that are quite at odds with a human gait and with a human foot function. In fact, there are aspects which I see that on the surface appear to be completely at odds with a normal human foot function, which would make it extremely difficult to fabricate. If it is a man in a costume, it's not just a man in a rented fur suit. It would have to be an extremely elaborate prosthetic device, even at the level of the foot, in which extra articular areas were introduced and the foot proportions were altered in such a way as to leave a signature in the footprint that was evident of a very specific dynamic.
The Patterson film is our basis for everything. The Patterson film is right out in the open. The creature turns slowly and looks at you. You see the strange gait it has, the movements it makes, and all these hoaxes don't look like this creature whatsoever. The one thing that is a constant is the Patterson film. I mean, that will never go away until someone, like we say, if they can prove that that was hoaxed, it'll go away like the rest of them. But it's been there for 30 years now. It's not been proven wrong, and every time something comes up about Bigfoot, that film comes into play somewhere, whether it's talked about or whether it's shown. That is a constant moneymaker because people believe it's real.
As I walked across this sandbar, I was able to get some fairly good footage of it. It turned a couple of times and looked at us, and as it turned, it seemed to give me the impression that it didn't want anything to do with us. It didn't run, it didn't act scared, but yet it acted leery of us.
The enigma of the Bigfoot is a mystery that has persisted and intrigued people across the globe for centuries.
At the very least, there's no question that the phenomenon exists. People claim to see this creatures. It's part of the American psyche.
Regardless of the lack of evidence of Bigfoot's existence, people want to believe, and the topic will continue to spark intrigue for generations.
I've been interested in Bigfoot since the early 60s. I started off in junior high school just reading. From that point on, I got involved and I can't let go.